on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and our special guest, John Cass, johncassnews.com, Chicago A podcast.
I'm sorry I stepped away because I may have missed the wonderful John Cass News commercial.
Well, we still play them. They air
You're
here.
a walking John Cass News, talking johncassnews.com commercial.
Cacio e Pepe.
All the high-minded pronouncements of these Ivy League presidents, not limited to the Ivy League, but they're sort of a ground zero and a particularly good representation of what's happening at the collegiate level across the country, what has been happening. All the high-minded pronouncements don't amount to much when day after day you have incidents like what happened yesterday at Columbia's Butler Library, where a large group of masked protesters, that's generous, pro-Hamas agitators, I think is more accurate, stormed into the library, waving flags, taping up slogans, chanting. It required the NYPD to move in to arrest about 80 of these pro-Hamas agitators and restore order. Secretary of State Rubio said visa statuses of those involved and arrested are under review, a la Mahmoud Khalil. And by the way, this is all against the backdrop of Colombia trying to massage some sort of agreement with the administration to keep the federal largesse flowing to Colombia. They're taking an appeasement route.
Isn't that their right?
Arguably a disingenuous one, as opposed to the approach that Harvard and some other schools are taking, which is the litigation route.
Don't they have a right to our money?
Right. At Temple University, just to give you, in their own words, an example of the sort of individual we're talking about. This is a Zoom call among some of the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is this group that purportedly gets funding from actual terrorist organizations across the globe, linked to Hamas in particular. Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at Temple University in Philadelphia, a Zoom call with some of the leading lights of this group. You'll hear from, in order, Mohammed Khatib, who's a European coordinator for the U.S.-designated terrorist group Samadon. European coordinator for a U.S.-designated terrorist group who's an undergrad at Temple, I understand, or somehow involved in Students for Justice in Palestine. Either way, it's problematic. Then Bina, a they-them student activist. And then Rishi Arun. Take a listen.
So we see this existential connection between the Palestinian students movement and the political prisoners. So the Palestinian student, the day after of Oslo, they changed their activism from the campus to the armed struggle. If Palestine is liberated, this means this is a nail to dismantle the United States of America.
We know it's a victory when a red triangle goes above an Israeli soldier's head and the pig gets iced. Like, we know that's a victory. We know it's a victory when prisoners break out. We know it's a victory when all these things happen. But a lot of people don't necessarily know that. And it's not their fault they don't know that. It's our fault.
We will free Mumia because it is our job to destroy imperialism, destroy the United States, and destroy capitalism and the system of extraction that it relies on to perpetuate itself. And we will do it by organizing in a manner that actively undermines and destabilizes the legitimacy and the power of the state and the power and legitimacy of capitalism.
Boy, the evidence just continues to mount that this is not about Gazan residents / refugees. This is about destroying the West, which it's always been. And this is, again, why you see the same people wearing keffiyehs protesting in Colombia are out protesting for, ironically, LGBTQ grievances, for the full panoply of neo-Marxist causes.
It's like I listened to this guy talking, and I'm thinking he must have gotten an A on his Howard Zinn book report, People's History of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, these guys take it well beyond Zinn, even, which is a frightening reality. Amy Wax is the Robert Mundheim Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She has been addressing this for some time and also been targeted by some of these intemperate types at University of Penn. Professor Wax joins us now. Professor, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here.
I can't imagine you're surprised by what you hear from some of these adherents, Students for Justice in Palestine, what you see happening at Columbia every other day. You're not particularly surprised. I remember a couple of years ago when you were on this show where you said the Ivy League is basically over. It is not redeemable. It needs to be, sort of shuttered and reimagined.
Well, it at least needs to be defunded and reduced because it has become a site of anti-American and anti-Western agitation and attitudes, and none of those have really changed recently, even though they've been under a lot of pressure. Their reaction is to deny and resist.
The just if you could refresh our audience's recollection of the criticism and efforts to expel you that were afoot for commentary you made about feminists and other such identitarian topics, because I just want an example of the people, as I said, wearing keffiyehs now are the same people that were trying to get you kicked out of Penn Law for commenting on other matters unrelated to the Middle East.
Well, it's a very long saga, and I won't bore your listeners with all the excruciating details, but some of the opinions that I expressed, and these are, outside of the classroom, in the media, in podcasts and interviews, and in publications, which I am very much entitled to. My viewpoints on those contexts, those were objected to by identity groups on campus, and really that's the theme. These multicultural identity groups of students have been fed a narrative, a Zinn-like narrative, and certain facts, which are essentially fairy tales, about different groups and their role in American society, and anybody who dares to criticize that narrative or offer alternative true facts about identity groups, group achievements, group behavior, that person is suspect on campus. So if you comment, for example, that blacks tend to commit crimes at a higher rate, or that there are achievement gaps in the school in grades that different groups get as a result of affirmative action, those are forbidden thoughts. So those are some of the thoughts that these groups complained about to the administration, and of course the administration responded. They brought charges against me. They found me guilty of inequitably targeted disrespect and other made-up, vague infractions. They've suspended me for a year, although my suspension has not started yet because I was in the middle of teaching when that happened, and cut my salary. So there have been various penalties that have been imposed on me, and now I'm in the middle of a lawsuit challenging those penalties.
In the discovery of that lawsuit or any other legal avenue, can we find out how much the governments of Saudi and Qatar are paying the universities to develop these departments where fairy tales and hatred are spewed out on a regular basis in the Ivy League?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit peripheral to my lawsuit, but
Yes.
that information is available, and it has been reported. It has been written about. If people are curious, I would refer them to an organization that I've served on the board of called the National Association of Scholars. The National Association of Scholars, NAS, which you can Google, has reports on foreign government support of centers at our universities. There are massive amounts of money that China, Qatar, other countries have put into our universities, and which definitely influence what is taught. But I'm sorry to have to report this. Foreign students and foreign governments have a big role in some of the anti-American, anti-Western tilt on campus, but a lot of it just comes from the faculty and from the administration. A lot of it is homegrown. So it's really a collusion between these foreign influences and native influences. I myself have come out against having so many foreign students and foreign student visas because I think that just adds fuel to the fire. I don't think that taxpayers, American taxpayers, should be paying to educate people from Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. That's crazy. And of course, that's happening more and more. But when we bring in third world students and faculty and centers, we bring in anti-Western, anti-Semitic ideas by definition, because those cultures have not gone through the evolution that the West has gone through to tamp down religious intolerance, to tamp down tribalism. So we're really just shooting ourselves in the foot here in our student policies, visa policies, immigration policies, and educational policies.
I saw that the psychologist Steven Pinker said there's been some progress made at Harvard in the direction of free speech, which is interesting because the Harvard president, Ellen Garber, said on 60 Minutes just a couple of weeks ago that they've got an anti-Semitism problem on campus. Yeah, no kidding. But I just wonder, do you see a progress that Steven Pinker sees at Harvard or at Penn since, for example, Liz McGill had to resign as president of Penn? Do we see any green shoots at some of these schools?
Well, I can't speak to Harvard, but I can tell you, being a professor at Penn, that I haven't seen any. None, like literally none. There was a recent series of faculty senate panels and presentations on the threat to higher ed by the Trump administration, the crisis, the existential crisis, and all of this alarmist talk. And if you listen to these panel presentations, which includes Penn people and outside people as well, their attitude is, we are wonderful, we are faultless, there is nothing wrong with us, we are a boon to democracy and to America. Why are they doing this to us? We just don't understand. They are completely oblivious to the complaints that you have just reviewed in your segment and that have been documented, the sort of Zinn-like attack on the American way of life, all the crazy stuff with DEI and racial policies and, anti-Semitic activity, the tamping of free speech, the persecution of people like me who dissent from the woke dogma. I mean, all of that is just not even mentioned, all right? They refuse to even acknowledge it. They think that taxpayer money is their entitlement. So just listen to the rhetoric, and there is resistance, 100% resistance to what is happening.
I admire your strength, and it's not fun, waiting for your sentence to begin, so to speak. But when do you begin your 1-year suspension, and is there any hope your lawyers can get you out of it?
Well, yes, we're working on that right now. My suspension begins July 1st, so I won't be able to teach next year. But our judge in our case is now considering something called a preliminary injunction, and that would be suspending my suspension, essentially putting it off until my case is resolved. Because if you think about it, if they suspend me and then ultimately I win my case, which I hope I will, but it's not guaranteed, then the suspension will have happened, and they do to make up for that. So we are asking the judge, and he does promise to rule in the next month or so on whether my suspension will happen or not. And I certainly hope it won't, because a lot of students have asked me, will you be around next year? Will you be teaching? All of that. Yeah.
One of the criticisms you've lodged against higher ed is the feminization of it in a political sense. And I wonder what you think, if anything, can be done to address that. I'm thinking in particular about the disparity these days in male versus female students as undergrads, which is like 60-40 women, and I think that gap is expanding, including in most disciplines, including in most for most advanced degrees as well. And it seems like it's sort of a trick bag. If part of the issue is, or part of the solution is to encourage more young men to go to college, then at the same time you have a lot of people discouraging young people generally, including young men, who go into the trades after high school. Don't go to college because it's not worth it. And, oh, by the way, if you're a white male, you're going to be reviled, and that's not necessarily attractive to a lot of young men. I just wonder if you think there's a way to address that, and if the disparity to the male-female disparity is one of the needs on that score.
Well, I mean, the male-female disparity has upsides and downsides. You're absolutely right that the feminization of these institutions is driving away young men, and that's completely understandable. But it's a vicious circle, because these institutions are self-governing, and the more females there are, as students are in positions of power, the more feminized it becomes, the more emotions rule over logic and discourse and rigor and that sort of thing. But, frankly, I think the only solution to what's happening in higher ed is to shrink the sector, to take away their money, to take away their... And if that requires fewer men going to college, then that could be a positive thing. If men abandon higher ed, then higher ed is going to be deprived of that student segment. And it might be good for men as well, because a lot of men really shouldn't be in college. They're not terribly interested in that route. They don't get a lot out of it. They'd be better off training for specific jobs. The only downside, I think, is it really does interfere with men and women getting together in relationships, getting married, having children, and that is, the hallmark of a dying civilization. We have a birth rate problem and a marriage problem in our society, and that's the sign of a decadent, dying society, frankly. I don't really know what to do about that. And, of course, women stubbornly are hypergamous. They want to marry men who are equal or above them in status. It's very hard to argue them out of that, even though they're very hostile to men now. And they talk about toxic masculinity all the time. So I have no magic solutions to this vicious circle that we're in.
I'm not an expert because I've been married for 39 years now, so I'm out of the market. But I need to ask you, as far as women are concerned, why are these angry women continually... It seems like whenever I'm watching the news stories on this, it's an angry woman screaming from the river to the sea. Why?
Well, I mean, women are very vulnerable to what I would call pathological altruism. Just, championing what they perceive to be the underdog in a very myopic way, a very emotion-driven way. They buy into the whole woke paradigm of oppressor and oppressed. They are not traditionally and historically primarily responsible for upholding and pushing forward civilization in its highest achievements. They are playing a supporting role mostly, and I don't see that as changing very much or continuing, but now that supporting role has turned into an undermining role. Women, that's part of the feminization. Feminization is to be ruled by emotions, by empathy, by altruism, by all of these feelings in a very primitive and short-term way, and not being able to see the long-term destructive effects of that. I think women are particularly prone to that. And it's paradoxical because these are supposed to be the most educated women in society. And yet what they've been educated to is this bizarre, twisted ideology that we call wokeism.
Amy Wax is the Robert Mundheim Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Professor Wax, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, good luck. I'll have you in my prayers. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm Ken Mariotti, owner of Woodland Windows and Doors, a third-generation family-owned business since 1969. We know you're bombarded by choices when shopping for new windows or doors, so we're inviting you to experience the Woodland difference. For decades, we have been